Islamic.
لا إله إلا الله الحمد وهو على كل شيء لا إله شريك له ويميت على كل شيء. لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله له الملك وله الحمد وهو على لا إله إلا الله الحمد لله لا إله إلا الله وحده
Also blessing from Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala. I will now invite Dr. Muhammad Irwan Arifin from Department of Economics to proceed with the recitation of dua.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. On this blessed afternoon, O Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala, in conjunction with our program, the Book Review Forum on Islamic Finance and Sustainable Development, organized jointly by the Center for Islamic Economics, IIUM, and Maybank Islamic, we are grateful for all the favors and blessings you have bestowed upon us. O Allah, we seek your blessings for the smooth flow of this program and that you grant us beneficial knowledge from this forum and guide us to contribute toward the betterment of the Muslim society and humanity. Allahumma arham jam'ana hadha jam'an marhuma wa tafarraqna min ba'dihi tafarruqan ma'suma wa la taj'al fina wa la ma'ana wa la man yatba'una shaqiyan wa la mahruma wa la matruda. ربنا عليك توكلنا وإليك أنبنا وإليك المصير ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم الحمد لله رب العالمين.
Thank you, Dr. Irwan. May Allah bless our event, insyaAllah. To begin with the event, I have the pleasure to invite Yang Berbahagia Professor Dr. Ahmad Faris bin Ismail, Deputy Rector, Academic and Internationalization of IIUM, to deliver his welcoming remarks. Please be welcome.
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya wa mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Subhanaka la ilma lana ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. So first of all, let me welcome Yang Berbahagia Datuk Muhammad Rafiq Marikan, the Chief Executive Officer, Maybank Islamic Berhad, and his team and entourage. Welcome to IIUM, the Garden of Knowledge and Virtue. My colleagues, especially from Kuliah of Economics and Management Sciences, the panelists, I think I have to mention because we are here because of the panelists. I hope they will not torture us with so heavy. The panelists are Professor Dr. Muhammad Aslam Hanif from our Kuliah of Economics and Management Sciences, also the founding director of IIM Center for Islamic Economics. My other friend, Associate Professor Dr. Mom. Oh yeah, I see you there. Mustafa Omar Muhammad, which is now in United Arab Emirates, I guess. Al-Qasimiyah University, And of course, he also a former director of our IUM Center for Islamic Economics. We miss you, Mom. And then, of course, Dr. Liza Maidin, the Vice President of Maybank Islamic and the Islamic Sustainable Finance and VBI. And of course, not to forget the moderator, Dr. Riyasat Amin Imon. Not to forget also my beloved students, postgraduate and undergraduate students. I guess at the university, we cherish this moment of intellectual discourse. So on that note, I think I would like to congratulate the organizers for having this book review session. In particular, I think I need to maybe special thank to Datuk, CEO of Maybank Islamic Berhad for sponsoring and supporting this event for the last 3 years. I was informed that there are 3 cycles of the book review, and this is the last cycle, and we hope that the cycles will not stop here, will continue. You know, the cycle will, especially when we talk about sustainability, we need to sustain the cycles, you know. So we hope that we look forward for the next cycles, maybe a bigger cycles. Indeed, I'm very happy and also excited to see the title of the book that will be reviewed today on Islamic finance and sustainable development. Earlier during the first cycle, the review was on Maududi's first principle of Islamic economics. I guess that was very old work. Prophet Islam, Maududi's work is very old. And then after that, followed by Chapra's towards a just monetary system. And now we are talking about Islamic finance and sustainable development. And indeed, to me personally, experiencing the COVID-19 pandemic last year and maybe a year before, and looking at how the what you call it, the problems facing the humanity, not only in Malaysia but throughout the world, in terms of economics, especially in terms of economics. When things were closed, locked down, and then of course, and then suddenly we discover that Malaysia has a lot of debt, okay, and then no income, how to pay your debt, that sort of thing. So that reminds me of the longest verse in the Quran. When we check the Quran, the longest verse, 1 full page, is about debt, about how you manage your debt. And that is, I think, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed this, a very important topic in human life. And I think we should learn. And I believe that, the Islamic teachings and Islamic principles of economics has a lot of thing to give to the humanity to solve this problem. So that's why I think always our discussion is how can we really come up with the system. And today we're talking about Islamic finance and sustainable development that is truly Islamic, that is truly not mimicking the Western paradigm, moving forward to Islamic. And now we're talking about Rahmatan lil Alamin. We're talking about how to benefit the world. And I guess the Islamic teachings are there. And I think there's a challenge upon us, the scholars and the practitioners. How can we work together, come up with viable solutions, and at the same time is for the betterment of the society and the humanity, and of course, the world at large. Of course, we were very stunned a couple of days ago when banks in California collapsing. I think if you are not following, so collapsing banks in California. So I guess this is where, again, I think whatever knowledge that we have, I think we need to put our thought together and see how can we sustain this development. Going back to a just society system and so on and so forth. So of course, at this university, this is my last point. This year is we are celebrating our 40th anniversary, And the Kuliah of Economics and Management Sciences was one of the first 2 kuliahs, because I mean, when the university started, it was only 2 kuliahs. One is in Islamic, in Economics and Management Sciences, another one is in Law, with Allah Yarham Tan Sri Ahmad Ibrahim as the pioneering dean at the time. So they are also celebrating 40th anniversary, and indeed, I think, Alhamdulillah, I think we thank Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala that I think the kuliah has, I mean, one of the pioneer in the country talking about Islamic finance and economics in the country. And I hope that with the collaboration with Maybank Islamic, I think we can prosper together, inshallah. So with that, I hope that this book review will be successful and we will learn from our learned panelists. Okay, so again, Dato', thank you very much to come and join us this afternoon despite your busy schedule. Okay, and also all the participants. Wabillahi taufiq wa hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Prof, for the welcoming remarks. Now I have the pleasure to invite Yang Berbahagia Datuk Muhammad Rafiq Merican, Chief Executive Officer Maybank Islamic Banking to deliver, Maybank Islamic Berhad to deliver his opening speech. Please be welcome.
Thank you, Saudari Pengacara Majlis. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Professor Dr. Ahmad Faris bin Ismail, Deputy Rector, Academic and Internalization, IIUM. Our esteemed panelists, Professor Dr. Muhammad Aslam Muhammad Hanif, Founding Director, Center of Islamic Economics, IIUM. Associate Professor Dr. Mustafa Omar Muhammad, College of Economics and Management, Al-Qasimiyah University, and the former Director, Center of Islamic Economics, IIUM. Distinguished guests, fellow bankers who are here, as well as ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First of all, thank you so much for the very warm welcome for the team coming from Maybank Islamic. I think without going to the text, and maybe at some point I will come to the text, but in terms of the journey of Maybank Islamic and the expectation for an Islamic financial institution like Maybank Islamic, our aspiration is that we have actually grown to a certain size, the industry in Malaysia, and the expectation is, even if you were to actually take a look at the text within the budget speech, for example, as well as expectations out there for Malaysia, is that you have grown your Islamic banking industry to a certain size. Where do you go from here? And that question has been posed to us so many times. And for us, the opportunity is to work with other parts of that ecosystem for Islamic finance, as well as the broader Islamic economy, to be able to take on a greater share of that responsibility. Firstly, because conventional is well established. Then when it comes to Islamic finance, how do you actually firstly compete when you're small? And Alhamdulillah, I think last year, in terms of the Malaysian banking system, it's about 32% is under Islamic banking, right? It has grown to a level whereby it's deemed as, not to quote that California maturity to that story too, but it has grown to a size whereby it's considered as carrying some level of systemic risk, right? So we are managed and we are regulated in the same way as conventional bank, but we have grown to a size whereby it has actually become mainstream. That was the initial ambition for Islamic finance to actually become mainstream in Malaysia based on the original master plan. And then subsequently the challenge is, where do we go from here? And the where do we go from here is about, can we start to actually benefit the community? Can we start to actually embed Islamic banking principles or Sharia principles into the way that we actually do our business, not just for profit? So basically, Dr. Liza heads up our value-based intermediation initiatives, but even this year, for example, we have actually established what we call an ethical banking unit, which is headed by Maybank Islamic for Maybank Group. And the intention is, we wanted to actually incorporate the principles coming from Maqasid, from Sharia, right? We have distilled it down into 5. And the biggest issue was riba, non-riba, right? We defined that and we distilled that into oppressive practices. We talk about the environment, which is a topic for today. The other one is in terms of how do we actually deal with our customers, those who are either underserved or not even being served at all within the banking system. How can we actually provide equity as well as social justice? So that is continues to be a new model that we want to actually take forward within the Maybank Group, which is headed or spearheaded by Maybank Islamic. The other one is as we start to actually grow out there, we get acknowledged that Malaysia is a leader in Islamic finance, and thanks to institutions such as IIUM. Yeah? I think we have a few scholars on our Sharia committee that actually comes from IIUM. Right? We have within our team at Maybank Islamic also coming from this renowned as well as respected institution. Then the question is, where do we go from here? And what we have actually done is we're starting to actually engage with the wider Islamic banking industry at large to see how we can actually contribute more. Because if we don't do it, who else will do it in order to actually mainstream the Islamic finance industry? So that's one aspiration that we have, and hopefully in our collaborations with institutions such as IIUM, we're able to actually take that agenda forward. Specifically on this session that we're going to have today, it is being spearheaded by what we call our Maybank Islamic Center of Excellence. We have many things that we are currently pursuing under the Center of Excellence. One is the translation of journals or books which are of global standing, right? And the other one is to also be able to share that with the widest community possible, right? Firstly, to share. Secondly, is to see how we can best demonstrate some of the values that are coming from some of these publications. The other one is we have programs, Islamic social finance, for example, where we work with implementation agencies to be able to actually create a difference for the community. Because to exist within purely the finance space without actually connecting with the community is not quite fulfilling the outcomes of what Sharia is asking of us. Yeah. So moving forward for Maybank Islamic is to grow and spread this into the mainstream of global financial services. That's one agenda. Two is how do we actually take this to the international level? And thirdly is how do we actually increase the level of knowledge that is available out there so that there is a greater level of initially understanding. Subsequently, if you can actually increase the level of acceptance for Islamic finance, what does it mean? What is it not? What it is compared to say conventional? Then hopefully we can actually find a differentiator, right? So with that, thank you once again, Prof. and the team from IIM, as well as our panelists. Hopefully, if there are any notable research pieces being done by the center here, do let us know. Then perhaps we can actually raise it to a level whereby we can present this at a bigger forum, inshallah. So with that, thank you so much. Saya sudahi dengan wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you so much for having us here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Latuk, for the opening speech. Without further ado, I think let us proceed with the main agenda, which is the book review forum. So allow me to pass the floor to my colleagues, Dr. Riyasat Amin from the same Department of Economics, IIUM, to carry out with the responsibility and to moderate the forum. Dr. Riyasat, the floor is yours.
All right. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Dr. Muhammad Rafiq Merikat, who's the CEO of Maybank Islamic, and Prof. Dr. Ahmad Faris, Deputy Director of Academic and Internalization, our honored guests and panel members who I'll be introducing soon. Thank you very much, even to all our students in attendance. Thank you also very much to the Master of Ceremony, Dr. Zara, for handling the session until now so smoothly. And I'm Dr. Riyasat Amin Imwan with the Department of Economics. I will be moderating the session, and I feel privileged to introduce to you our very esteemed panel. I'll do so in the order of speaking. So our first panel member is Prof. Dr. Muhammad Aslam Hanif, who has already been introduced a few times. So I will rush through I will not mention founding director, but I just did. So, he's also the director of Academic Development Division in Triple IT East and Southeast Asia, and Islamic Economics and Education Research. Most recently, he was, in fact, this is very recent, like we came to know yesterday, he was appointed as a member of Board of Directors at the Institute of Strategic and International Studies. So that's ISIS. So congratulations to him on that. And he has also authored, of course, several books, chapters, and journal papers, and he's the winner of many awards. And our second speaker, of course, is Dr. Mustafa Omar Mohammed. He is currently the Associate Professor and Studies and Research Specialist at Al Qasimiyah University in UAE. I can say Al Qasimiyah as many times as I like and want, but Dr. Mustafa's kampung is UIA. He has literally been here with us, and he's really part of the family here no matter where he is. He specializes in the area of Maqasid al-Sharia and Islamic finance, especially Islamic social finance. He's also a former director of CIE. He has more than 70 referee journal articles and 80 papers, including the author of many book chapters as well. He has conducted consultancy and training in several countries involving executive leadership or of practitioners, academicians, and Sharia scholars. Last but not least, we have Dr. Liza Maidin. She's the head of special projects, Islamic Sustainable Finance, the CEO office, Maybank Islamic Berhad. She is currently leading the development and implementation of social impact solutions for Maybank Islamic. She co-developed the country's and the bank's first social impact deposit initiative to extend financial relief during the COVID-19 pandemic. That's really great. And as a sustainability co-lead of Maybank Group in 2020, she was also very instrumental in developing the group's 5-year sustainability strategy, which basically shows her area of expertise. In addition, she is already the author of a book on social justice, and she has co-authored 2 other books, and hopefully many more to come. Of course, I must apologize, to the audience, because these introductions do not do justice to our esteemed panel. But we came here to learn from them and not to learn of them. So without any further ado, let's start. So the collaboration between Center of Islamic Economics, IIUM, and Maybank Islamic involves 3 cycles of book reviews. Today's session focuses on the 3rd cycle, but it is important to know what has happened in the previous 2 phases as well. For this, we would like to show you a video montage of the 3 cycles. All right. Thank you very much. So almost a half centuries of literature was summarized in that 5-minute video. And it also gave you a glimpse of a lot of the work that was put into this final book review. And thank you to the presentation team for putting that lively and wordy presentation together. And I thought it summarized everything quite well. Let's start the forum straight away now. So just to give you a basic idea of the structure, we're looking at about 3 separate rounds, and I promise you they're relatively short. There'll be 20 minutes each. Round 1, we will focus on the sustainable development, maqasid, and Islamic finance. And we'll be looking at mostly the book's input. And so we're looking at it from the academic perspective, the perspective of academia and research. And for this, this part will be presented by Prof. Aslam and Dr. Mustafa. And first, I have the pleasure of inviting Prof. Aslam to talk about some of his insights based on the book review and his personal experience. And you'll have 10 minutes, Prof. Aslam.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Yasat. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Prof. Faris, Dr. Iqbal, and your team from Maybank Islamic, colleagues and participants, students. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's great injustice to lecturers to have to present in 5 minutes something that took almost 6 months to research with the team. But I think, I believe there's output available, Dr. Nizam, in the form of a summary, and then there is a book review proper. So what I'm going to do here is actually to try and just extract some points that maybe can serve as discussion points later. As mentioned in the montage, Islamic economic views have been around for 50, if not longer, years. But I don't think they have made the impact as much as it should. And there are a few reasons for this. I think the contribution of Syed Hussein Nasser was mentioned, Man and Nature, little book that was a wonderful book in 1960s. But all these ideas of Islamic economists, and I have to emphasize that these were made by Islamic economists in the 60s and 70s, they were talking about a very important theme, that the goal of Islamic economics and of economic development was to establish socio-economic justice and well-being for all humanity. I think this is a very important point. Right from the beginning, that was what these pioneer economists talked about. But at that point in time, the development paradigm was a very material focused paradigm, talking about growth, GDP growth, right? So the material wealth of a country. And therefore, I believe that was one of the reasons why the ideas of Islamic economists did not gain as big a foothold as we would have liked it to. Then, unfortunately, and I say unfortunately because development discourse evolved in the West. It moved away from just talking about growth. Then they talked about Human Development Index. They talked about social development. Then they talked about sustainable development. And then in recent years, the Sustainable Development Goals, right? Unfortunately, in Islamic economics, the discussion that the pioneers made in the 60s and 70s and even early 80s was overtaken by the interest in Islamic banking. So this is not a criticism of Islamic banking, but a lot of resources went into Islamic banking. And I think there is a basis for it. We needed solutions for avoiding riba, right? So a lot of human resource, a lot of financial resources went into that area, and not enough resources to evolve Islamic economics as a base, right? Fast forward, with the discourse on sustainable development and sustainable development goals today, I believe it gives us another opportunity to bring back that focus on socioeconomic justice and well-being of everyone. Yeah, I think that gives us that opportunity. And the book that we have been reviewing actually talks about that. And what they argue in a nutshell is Islamic finance has to become a transformative force. So that transformative force is very important, meaning that it probably has to move away from its current or previous trajectory. And in the discussion with Iqbal before this, there is already, I think, ideas to talk about what next, right? So I'm very happy to hear that, how Islamic finance can become this transformative force. And I think this can happen only if we put our heads together, our minds together, our hearts together, academia, industry together, in order to make that change.
About, from your perspective, right? How is it that Islamic economics and finance discipline contributes to the intellectual development and debate in sustainability? How does it improve, the way this discussion takes place?
Okay, well, as I said just now, there has been contribution, but probably not mainstream yet. Okay, although I have to say that sometimes we in Muslim communities also we sometimes look always to the West for the lead. Yeah? And even though our scholars were saying this, they were not necessarily given the attention and maybe the lead that we should have been giving them. I believe Islamic economics and Islamic finance needs to engage with the conventional concepts, engage critically. All right. And I think this university is ideal for that, because I don't know, we used to have mission and visions stated somewhere in the room, right? And definitely IIUM has as its core mission this idea of integration of knowledge, of Islamization of knowledge. And what this mission means is we engage with development discourse, right? So we've talked about these concepts, I think, in the book, ESG, socially responsible investment, and of course in the Malaysian context, value-based intermediation. I think we need to engage, but what we need to do is to look at these concepts from an Islamic perspective. And I think this is where this idea of integration, this idea of Islamization, comes very, very clear. In the book, many of the authors have tried in the conceptual papers, in the empirical papers, to do this interaction. All right. And I think this is what we need to do. I don't think anybody in the team of researchers agrees that you need to abandon the last 300 years. That this is part of human civilization. I don't think in Islamic tradition we ever neglected the treasure coming from other civilizations. If we look at Islamic civilization, if we look at the Prophet, may peace be upon him, his example, even if we look at the Quran, there is recognition of the previous civilizations, the previous religions, but we need to critically engage. So I think that's the way forward. We need to do that. And in the context of this book, I believe what the editors have tried to do, and the authors of chapters, they have tried to say that we need to look at Islamic finance and sustainable development with reference to the Sharia, or maybe something that we need to focus on, the higher objectives of the Sharia. So maybe with that, I'll stop here. And
if you can just clarify, when you use the word engage, who are we engaging exactly? I mean, do you mean just the industry, or?
No, definitely, at least as far as academia is concerned, I think our role is to engage with scholars, with other scholars who have brought this evolution of sustainable development over the years, of development going into sustainable development. It's our task as academics to critically engage with that discourse. Although I do say that what we have today is closer to the Islamic view compared to what it was in the 60s, but there are still issues that we need to refer to, and that is why I think we have to go back to the higher objectives of the Sharia and what that entails. Wallahu a'lam.
I'd like to invite the other panel members to maybe comment, Dr. Liza or Dr. Mustafa, if you would like to add on anything. Dr. Mustafa, maybe?
Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. First of all, thank you very much, the moderator,
Yeah, I think the Prof. Aslam has put very, very interesting areas here, especially from the economics perspective. The other dimensions which the book tried to focus on is to break down some of those concepts into models, looking at how Islamic finance could achieve some of those dimensions. So there were a few models that they try to look at it to make Islamic finance sustainable. And based on, for example, those 5 areas of maqasid, looking at the deen, looking at mal, and looking at all those dimensions. How could they be sustainable? And the focus, which was very interesting, was the model by Ubaidullah, where he tried to look at this sustainability from that perspective. What are those dimensions? And interestingly, the missing link, just like Professor was saying, is those value aspects of development. You can talk of sustainable development, but those value aspects are still missing when people talk about sustainable development. So by value dimension, I mean, people transform. They need values of fairness, values of those spiritual religious values, those moral values which really form parts of the human beings. So I think in that regard he is right that that dimension has to be looked at seriously if sustainable development has to move forward. And I think this is one area also where IIUM has now tried to embed it as part of its way forward, to add on that spiritual dimension in its definition of sustainability. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Dr. Rasad. I think I'll just add to what the panelists have said before, in that over the many chapters covered in the book, what is consistent is that whilst the UN SDGs provide a very good architecture and framework, what it lacks within it are the scaffoldings of risk sharing, elimination of wealth hoarding and opulence. It tends to be quite silent on these important issues, which is quite important in solving the issues surrounding income inequality and eradication of poverty. What we found and what the pandemic has done is that efforts to eradicate poverty took a setback of 4 years due to COVID-19. There are about 1 billion people more that has been pushed into hardcore poverty. And so the maqasid and principles of Sharia, I would say, provides the principles of design to the landscape of UN SDG and what the previous professors have said, the spiritual aspect of it. And what's also quite absent is this notion of incentive, this notion that once we comply to the Sharia, immense reward and benefit will come out of it. The incentive framework and the justification and the purpose on why we need to move forward with just social development, I think areas where Islamic finance, Islamic economy can have an important voice.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lisa. I thought the incentive framework was a very interesting idea. And I like the benchmarks that you mentioned, like hoarding, opulence. These are social benchmarks that we don't often talk about directly. Okay, so I think that we'll go to the second panel member's speech, which is Dr. Mustafa. And I'd like to invite him to share some of his observations from the maqasid perspective. Dr. Mustafa, 10 minutes as well, yeah?
Okay, thank you once again. Let me begin first by acknowledging the presence of Dr. Muhammad Rafiq, American, the CEO of Maybank Islamic. And also would like to acknowledge the presence of my old friend, somebody who had been with so long since PJ, Prof. Ahmad Faris. At that time, he happened to be the youngest dean of engineering. And I'm sure he's still young, dia masih muda, Prof. And also others in the panel among my colleagues and the team from IAUM by Dr. Nizam and also Brother Rayhan. Thank you for the good job with your team and all the practitioners and those who are following us online and offline. Good afternoon to everybody. Now, your questions which you have raised, Dr. Riyasad, I think has two dimensions. One is the extent to which Islamic finance has adopted maqasid as a guiding principle for its operation. And of course, the second thing is the challenges that they have gone through or they are going through while implementing this tool. Now, many of us know that for the last 15, 20 years, Malaysia perhaps is among the few countries that try to operationalize maqasid al-Sharia in different areas, particularly in the banking sector. From the central bank, you find a lot of commercial banks putting a lot of efforts in universities everywhere. It seems maqasid is becoming just a part of the life of the people, mainstream in the industry. And this is something which we need to acknowledge, which is very good. Now, the book itself, for which, and I would like to thank also the authors, Prof. Kabir Hassan and the team, the co-authors, that they dedicated around 5 chapters and have different sections of those chapters relating maqasid to SDG. And some of them try to relate Islamic finance to maqasid. And one of the interesting areas that they discussed there was how to redefine Islamic finance in the context of maqasid al-Sharia. So they argue that for Islamic finance to move forward, the current model of just focusing on Sharia compliant may not do justice to maqasid al-Sharia. So they thought that the discourse has to be elevated to a macro level where it is systemic in nature. You look at the discourse on transparency, you look at the discourse on fairness, the discourse on social justice, the idea of circular economy, the idea of digitization. In other words, the scope of maqasid al-Sharia has to go now beyond products and services. It has to go to the social and other important macro economic dimensions. So I thought this is very, very interesting. And of course, they presented 3 models on how to actualize these facts. Now, looking at the other dimensions of the challenges that the industry is going through, I would argue that I look at 3 dimensions in addition to what the book has said. One of the facts which I think the industry is facing as a challenge is, whether we like it or not, Islamic banking and finance still operates on conventional rules and regulations, largely. So these conventional rules and regulations impedes the ability of Islamic finance to actualize certain important principles in maqasid, just like Dr. Lisa was just speaking about those spirituality and the other dimensions which you mentioned, and also Prof. Aslam. This can only be implemented if there is a flexibility in the way these rules and regulations governing Islamic bank are allowed. And so there is always that idea of here, moving through the loopholes within the law to actualize maqasid al-Sharia. This is one biggest challenge. For example, all the theories that we use for our pricing in Islamic finance, theories of risk management, which Dr. Lisa just mentioned, and theories all related to assets, these are all still conventional. Accounting, all are still conventional in nature. So this impedes the ability of implementing maqasid. The other second thing, which I think is also of paramount importance, is to acknowledge that there has been effort on part of Islamic finance to implement maqasid. But most of this effort has largely been in the area of Islamic social finance, in responsible investment, things to do with CSR, which is something commendable. They have started in a good footing. And I was sharing a session with Prof. Aslam recently, and thank you very much to Dr. Latif of Quiz, who was present in that session. A very interesting question was raised from the floor about the core business of Islamic finance. And I thought that was a very interesting question, that how do we actualize Maqasid al-Sharia to the core business? It may be easy to look at the social finance and other CSR, because these are areas which may not have much rules and regulations impinging on them. But when it comes to the core business, this is where still a lot of efforts are needed to push Maqasid al-Sharia. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, for example, hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you clearly.
Exactly, thank you. So this brings us to the third important challenge of actualizing what I'm talking about, is the idea of a viable framework. Now, there has been a lot of efforts from the banks, including Maybank Islamic. We had a very interesting presentation on their efforts towards sustainable development, etc. And I'm sure there are a lot of other efforts on Maqasid al-Sharia. But the question is, how do we measure that? To tell the world that, you see, this is where we're moving with our Maqasid al-Sharia, and this is what has been achieved so far, and this is the way forward. In other words, is this effort embedded in the visions of our banks? Are they embedded in the mission? Are they embedded in the objectives? Do we have parameters or dimensions of performance measurement to tell the world that this is how it is? So I think these challenges later we'll see that may require, and I agree with what the CEO has said, that maybe UAA could come handy in trying to look at those dimensions of the framework. So this is just a small observation that I have, and maybe my colleagues could add on those dimensions. Jazakumullah khair.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mustafa, for sharing. I think, as Dr. Rafiq mentioned as well, imagine 32%, of social impact from, Islamic finance. That would be really great. So moving on, I'd like to maybe invite some of the other panelists to maybe comment. Maybe we can start with Dr. Liza this time. Yes.
Thank you very much. I think covering other aspects of the chapters, if we can move on to maybe some of the interesting parts covered within the book, was an entire chapter dedicated to the pandemic and how we need to rethink and look at how we treat payment structures. I think that's very timely. And again, it touches upon what professors are saying, that the fairness and the social justice of it all, we can carry that brand proposition. It is within our very core purpose. It is encouraged in the Sharia. And so the book, I thought, covered this very nicely, and other aspects as well, in terms of covering digitalization, making sure that some of the instruments are provided and given greater scale to the community. And so these are it's a really exciting time. It's quite hopeful in terms of the outlook. We've started the first few years establishing the foundations. And so what next, I think, would be quite interesting.
Thank you, Dr. Riyasat, for giving the opportunity. The first thing I need to say is, apparently I mixed up the names. I don't know. Apparently I said Dato' Iqbal instead of Dato' Rafiq. So I'm still wondering. I thought it's clear. My apologies, Dato'. I think it's just goes to show I've been here for a very long time. Maybe the only point that I want to continue from what Dr. Mustafa said, it's about this idea that in order for us to move forward, we have to look at going beyond the fiqh dimension. I think in the book, there were a couple of chapters in which this was mentioned. Even if we want to talk about maqasid al-sharia, but if we look at the sharia as a legal code, then the objectives of that legal code are fine, but it doesn't really address what the sharia is. If the sharia is meant to be a guideline for all aspects of life, then it has to go beyond the legal dimension. So I think a couple of chapters talked about that in the book. It's something that we need to think about. So we really need, from a human resource point of view in banks, we need managers, we need investment people, we need auditors, we need economists who have that Islamic perspective and the understanding of maqasid sharia. I think that's a very important part, I think, from a human resource point of view. Wallahu.
I think just to add on to what you're saying, I think that even this whole idea of, our Sharia compliance being based specifically on interest has been the main focus in a lot of the writings in that book. And I think it's about going beyond just, interest, as was mentioned before. So I think the idea of moving beyond the fiqh and talking about social dimension is important, which is why even Dr. Liza's comment, which is like so much on the ground, is so relevant. Whereas we're looking at the theory and the framework, she's talking about payment systems and financial inclusion, which is the other aspect. And I think the idea is moving, converging in that sense and towards a right social dimension. Dr. Mustafa, maybe if you may indulge me, I have another question, which I think is relevant. I think it's very clear that the book talks about how we must move towards sustainable development based on a Sharia, a maqasid, a Sharia model. Maybe can you identify what you think is the biggest challenge, in your opinion, to achieve, this model? Dr. Mustafa, are you there?
Oh, sorry, it was muted. Okay, thank you.
It's okay.
Yeah. So as I had mentioned earlier, that the impediments, the most difficult part in the context of the book, it's talking about these arrangements that we have today. The focus on the micro, they look at it as a very big challenge. And just like Prof. Aslam says, that unless our understanding of Sharia means a way of life, which has a social dimension, economic dimension, and it's also relates to individuals, it relates to family, relates to society, state as a country at a global level. Once we move beyond that and look at maqasid from that dimension, then that would be the first step forward. And if we look at the book of Atiyah, which was published by IIIT, in that book, Atiyah came up with around 24 dimensions of what he calls the higher objectives, which includes caring, brotherhood, sharing, justice, fairness. You have just 24 of those high-level values. So I thought that these values are very, very important to embed in the narrative of the discussion of maqasid al-Sharia. And the book has also pointed a very interesting area about other dimensions of economy, the circular economy, and then the idea of digitization and socially responsible investment. Now, how do we put it in a macro dimension rather than just having a dichotomy? When you discuss about maqasid, then you talk about fiqh. Then when you want to give example, you bring a conventional example. So there's an issue of dualism here. So this is the second part. So the third part to me, which is very, very important, why all this is happening is because there is absence of viable framework. And I think this is where an effort is needed. And particularly, alhamdulillah, I think UAE has a lot of able teams, especially in the Center for Islamic Economics. And mashallah, the teams are very, very good. And I believe this is where they will fill the vacuum of this important challenge. Jazakallah khair.
I just wanted to highlight maybe one more issue in this part. I found that the book, how it spoke mostly about, the industry and academicians and how they're not complying. I thought it kind of left out another important stakeholder, which is very important for Islamic finance being realized, and that is consumer awareness. Because a lot of the risks in Islamic finance inherently is because, consumers don't support it enough, perhaps, maybe they're not aware of it and stuff. And I found that was a very weird vacuum, a strange vacuum for, still to be there. Maybe some of the panel members may comment on this. Why do you think that is? Oh yeah, please go ahead.
So maybe in terms of just to share, it is correct to say that there are some pockets that still take a look at Islamic finance and say that it mirrors conventional. That's just reality. But the other side that we also see is that currently, when it comes to Maybank Islamic, how we market our Islamic products is based on does it meet with the requirements of the customer. And we find that based on the 9 million customers that we have, about 3 odd million, about 1/3 are non-Muslims, right? So then the question is, why did they take it? Firstly, is the terms and the conditions were attractive, right? Although sometimes it's challenging in the past for our frontlines to explain the contracts, the raba, and the rest of it. But to the net question of whether it benefits the customer or not, I think it's coming across, it's going through, right? So it is a journey, and we think that we need to actually persevere, right? So we find that if 1/3 of our customer base are not driven by faith, but because of the values that it comes across from the products, then we're on to something, right? And then the other one, which sometimes, I don't like to see the word moratorium here, but what happened was that during the MCO, when the banks were looking at how best can we help those who were impacted by the movement control order, and we said, which model should we use? Conventional or Islamic? Conventional is, if you can't pay, then the interest accumulates, then there's a compounding element. Whereas on the Islamic space, it is not permissible, it's unthinkable, right? So in our discussions with the regulator, the view was that from Malaysia, when it came to the repayment assistance and the moratorium that was actually offered to the customers in 2020-21, followed Islamic finance. So sometimes, but we would like to actually also put it out there, right? That it has had an influence in the way that banking is being done in Malaysia when it comes to how do we assist the community. A lot more needs to actually be done. I take that point. How we actually put it across, sometimes there are incidents such as the MCO that allows Islamic finance to actually come to the fore. And increasingly now, to Dr. Liza's point, is we know there's a significant chunk of the population that have actually gone into B40. What programs do we have as an Islamic financial institution in order to actually assist them? We have that. It's more a question of how do we actually scale it to realize the outcomes that will matter to the segments that we're trying to assist. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Rafiq. I think the idea of Islamic finance gaining traction and then creating awareness of its value, I think that's a very interesting dimension. And I think, yeah, are there any other comments from the panel members regarding this? Okay, all right. So I think we are done focusing on round one, which was basically our perspective on the book, right? And the book's output regarding some of the ideas. And from here, we move to the second round, which is also 20 minutes. And from here, we're going to be focusing on the practitioner's perspective. And this section is mostly exclusively Dr. Liza's. So, Dr. Iza, you may take a little extra time, maybe about 13 minutes or so, and yeah, 3 minutes more, it's a lot. And after that, maybe I can ask the other panel members to weigh in as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the time given. It certainly has been an incredible journey for us. The Bank Negara strategy paper for VBI came out in 2018. And so we're about 5 years in. From the early days, what we started with was to look at the governing functions and units. And so when the strategy paper came out and thinking about sustainability and VBI, who would be best to do this? And how do we assign responsibilities and accountabilities to drive this agenda forward? We worked with Maybank Group. Our structure is very much a leverage model. And so it was really necessary for and important for us to work with Maybank Group in a collaborative manner to identify those units, to set up the structure and frameworks as well as the strategy. And really, it is as the book postulates that Islamic finance had an important role to play in the ESG conversations. For example, when sustainability discussions were being had, and they talked about preserving the environment from the atmosphere emissions, what we knew from Sharia teachings was that the focus should be expanded to all living things on this plane of existence. And that was the contribution that we provided from a Sharia Maqasid point of view, to say that all living creatures, the fungi, the microorganisms, those are all very important as well as caliphs on this earth. That conversation of biodiversity and climate change is only happening within the ESG realm this year. So for us, we knew that the Maqasid Sharia had a superior framework, and we were always there to provide our point of view in the sustainability conversation, to ensure that the teachings were included in the strategic vision and direction of the group. And I think Dr. Rafiq actually chaired the councils at group. So that was very important. And we were able to have an important voice because really we saw the framework had a lot to offer. We saw the teachings that's provided in the Quran and Sunnah was all encompassing and withstood the stand of time. And so drawing from these lessons and principles, we then developed the strategic vision for the entire group in collaboration with our conventional colleagues. And then we were able to develop the targets and commitments. And so with this in place, at the same time, we had to equip ourselves with technical knowledge in terms of what are the severity when we talk about climate change, what are the issues and what are the changes we needed to make. This is very technical, and I think someone who's looking at sustainability and Islamic finance, there is absolutely no escape. We have to understand emissions. We have to understand how accounting treatments are being done in the space. And once we do that, we have both realms of Islamic finance, sustainability, the threat of the climate crisis. And with that knowledge, we're able now to design meaningful products. What VBI does, and I think is very important as well for the industry, is that it created collaborative partnership. At the moment, we're working with HSBC Amana and Alliance in developing an industry standard for the sector. We're looking at ESG risk and best practices when it comes to mining. And so when it comes to sustainability and Islamic finance, there's a lot of collaboration, there's a lot of partnerships to achieving the common good, to achieving the end state of ensuring that no one should be left behind and the most vulnerable is protected. I think the other thing I'll say in terms of what we're seeing in industry, and again, drawing from the lessons from the book, is that the uniqueness of Islamic finance and the difference with ESG is that we tend to always look at the environment bit and the S bit and the governance bit together. There's no decoupling of any of these themes or elements, because Islamic finance or Islamic economy is magnificent in always thinking about the most vulnerable. It is in our reminders of zakat, reminders of sadaqah, and reminders of wakaf. And so when we look at the impacts of climate change, thinking and allocating and ensure that the proper safeguards and safety nets are provided to this group becomes really central to our mission. And that, I suppose, has been the voice that we provided to Maybank Group. And in that discussions, and when we saw that this was the more complete framework, we were given a free hand and free rein to chart the way forward and provide our input for the next 5 years. Now, since then, and so we started with governance unit, the framework and policies, the strategy and vision, and then the learning in terms of what are the material issues and risks. Now comes the exciting part in terms of what can we do to deepen our offerings. What can we do to think about innovative products so that it will serve the needs of every members of society? I like to say that the B60, the B40, the M40, the T20, because Allah says all living things, we cannot discard any members of the group. And so fairness is to all. And so for us right now, where we're at is we're thinking of deepening some of our offerings and seeing what we can do to provide more innovation in the space.
All right, thank you very much for giving us an inside perspective on the process. And it's very interesting because it seems that the narrative that is there, the goals, the general goals and aims are correct, but I think the challenge is probably their operationalization, right? And my question basically is exactly on that. As you saw in the book, right? We see in the book and literature as well, ESG, SRI, VBI, these are all very important components. In fact, I think Bank Negara has actually provided a framework, right, towards, in the name of VBI, but I think it mirrors ESG principles and things like that. So the first thing I'd like to ask is how helpful was that framework in moving forward? Because yes, the framework is there, but at the same time, a general observation is that not enough is being done. So maybe you can provide some input on those.
To be honest, Dr. Razak, when we started to have those conversations with Bank Negara, we thought we're actually doing all of this already. So it was really a nice reassurance, if I can say it that way. It gave us more conviction that this was the right way forward. We were always thinking about value creation, and that has never been forgotten, I think, in our purpose. However, with the framework of VBI, I think it gave a lot more meaning, and it highlighted the beauties of Sharia, the impact that it tries to generate for society, for environment, and it brought about what the Islamic ideal economy is supposed to look at. So in that sense, the conversations became a lot easier, and there was really never any resistance at all. It was from the practitioners, we understood the mandate and what the objectives of VBI was. The only, I suppose, challenge, if any, is that VBI, and so value creation, is something that one might say is just for Islamic banks. when in fact we thought that it was something, and this was the conversation we had with Bank Negara, value creation should be for all actually. The focus of risk sharing, the focus on real economy. And we thought, why won't we have these conversations with the conventional banks as well? It would bring the conversation a lot easier when we talk to our counterparts at Maybank Group. And I think, alhamdulillah, around 2020, Bank Negara themselves started to bring the VBI discussion central and to their conventional counterparts as well. And so it was a lot meaningful for us when the objectives and the directives was also something that they were advising conventional banks.
We had this internal joke saying that maybe VBI was targeting, Islamic banks mainly was because maybe the conventions were doing it and maybe we weren't doing it. So just to, but yeah, it's good that, the dialogue convinced, to broaden the application and things like that. I'm just curious that in the pipeline, are there any products that, that you're working on perhaps where you're able to kind of implement some of these values that you're espousing? Yeah.
I'll just add the difference with VBI. I think what Bank Negara is trying to do is, number one, in the design of products, to look at what customers need first and foremost, rather than what the bank wants to do, is to understand what would be good for society, what would be good for a certain segment of society, and what are their actual financial needs. So when we think of these issues, it was then important to design something that would help them rather than cost them more burden. That's one in the I suppose, the motto of designing products. Second, which is quite important, and we found also in this journey, is that there is no need to decouple the concept of commercial purpose and safeguarding the interest of society environment. They can go hand in hand. It's a discussion where we're seeing less and less resistance. Previously, a lot of debate on, there's a trade-off between doing good and gaining commercial profits. But that discussion is actually counter to what the Sharia teaches us, in that if we think about first what the society needs, what we can do for society, and then design a meaningful product, the reward is actually a balance and just equilibrium. So I'm happy to share one of our new products that was just announced yesterday. An example of this is this. Maybank Islamic started installing electric vehicle chargers. We have already 3 locations. So when we started this, we actually were very mindful the limitations of owning an electric vehicle, in that the infrastructure is not yet developed, and yet we wanted to encourage our customers to adopt a more low carbon lifestyle and mobility options. And so we thought we'd go out and install the chargers and provide the customers this convenience. We then linked, and this is where Islamic finance played a very important role. We linked the notion of providing the proceeds collected from those charges to social impact initiatives. What this effectively has done is that now there is a perpetual and continuous contribution to social impact. When the public uses any of our charges, there is always a contribution that we allocate to the B40 group, whether it is those in need or whether those who are impacted by floods. Those are the type of initiatives we're looking at.
Okay, I think what I can do is maybe I can invite the other panel members to comment on what Dr. Liza said, but we'll do so after the Azan. Yeah. All right, so let's resume. So I'm not sure, Dr. Lisa, did you finish or?
Yeah, I think
It's a bit
I'll
too-
just like to add
Yeah.
on another product. And so that was one example on the EV
Mm.
chargers front. The second example, my colleague Raihan sitting across me has done tremendous work in urban farming. And so this is another area that we're looking at where we provide an urban farming kit to the B40 segment. And we provide the tools that they need to become entrepreneurs and help sell some of their produce. And so we find that constant thinking about this group and ensuring that their needs are met is very important to us. And then finally, I think there are a number of other initiatives that we're working with group in that I think the outcome of it all is this. Number one is that we want to be very, I suppose, very collaborative with our own customers as well. We want to take an approach where we partner them and advise them in terms of what they can do to reduce their emissions. So it's a discussion rather than one that is consultative rather than forceful in terms of asking them to take a look at their emissions. We want to provide and we want to understand what are the issues when it comes to transitioning. The risk side for banks, all banks and not just Islamic banks, is this issue of stranded assets. What the climate change and the effects of climate change does is any investment that may look attractive now may not be there in 3 to 5 years because of climate change. The effects and the catastrophe that it brings, destruction it brings to society is quite great because livelihoods are lost. I suppose, again, profitability is impacted. And so what we want to do is ensure that with our customers, we partner with them on the sustainability journey. We understand what the ESG issues and risks are. And for this, we work with Maybank Group. That is one core area that we're starting to actively look at for the past 2 years, actually. Second thing is that I talked a lot about community. And so what we do as well is monitoring our own employees' carbon emissions. This is very important, our own footprint, our own responsibilities. Are we an organization that makes the problem worse? Or are our people, can we become agents of change so that we make certain changes to lifestyle and ensure that the problems that within ASEAN, we solve those. Within Malaysia, we ensure that we champion those. And so these, I think, are in broad, all of the areas that we're looking at. So it's been very busy.
I think these are really fantastic examples of how I guess the perspective of banks have, certainly yours, is maybe getting broader to include directly other stakeholders, right? Like, I mean, under normal circumstances, perhaps, that wouldn't be, maybe those client groups wouldn't be the first you consider. So I think, especially the farming kit, if you can clarify, do you provide even any kind of basic consultation when you give a farming kit? I mean, okay. So if you look at it, that's actually overlapping with the role of maybe what microfinance institutions would do. And I think that's really change. So that's great. Prof. Assam, would you like to maybe comment?
Just very quickly, I am very happy to hear, well, firstly, the agents of change, our former teacher and rector, late Tan Sri Kamal Hassan, used to always tell all students, or all the students here, you are agents of change. You're going out and you're supposed to make the changes that we're looking for. Yeah? Also, what you mentioned about what you're doing means that the old model that Malaysia used to promote, Islamic banking is the Tijari sector, and then you got the Siasi sector and the Ijtimai. You're breaking down that and the Tijari sector can also be involved with activities that help the community. And that's a very big change. And it's good to know that banks are now actually pushing this idea. And we have, I think, Islamic social finance and all these SDGs to thank for that. So it gives us that opportunity, I think, to work together for this, the way forward, I think. Wallahu.
Okay, can I?
Yeah, please.
Okay, can I add to that point? I think probably when we embarked on this journey, we didn't realize that because of the size of the institution that we represent, we had the ability to actually influence the economy. An example would be like, for example, when we actually put out there, we said, we're not going to actually finance any more new coal-fired power plants. That actually drove behavior for the whole industry, right? Tenaga is a valued customer. And because of that, they also came out with their own commitment in order to actually transition to more friendlier renewable energy sources. That's one. The other one is for the plantation sector. When the banks actually announced they will not actually finance new plantations on peat soil, that had significant implications for the plantation companies, right? So perhaps when we looked at it from an internal standpoint, we didn't actually look at the influence that we may have for the size of, say, for example, the Islamic finance industry. Now at the size that we are at, we are being heard and people are reacting to the things that we are taking a position on, right? That's huge positive, right? So even see, for example, other industries and even other countries, for example, the next step is what else can we actually do for the size that we are in order to actually drive this agenda?
I think what's interesting with what you say, it changes the way we look at too big to fail. Because too big to fail generally means that, oh, we run out of money. But in this case, too big to fail means, oh, we're running out of farming equipment. We can't be green anymore, or we can't. And I think that's the benchmark that we want. That's the relationship we want between the financial sector and the real economy. So I think this is actually a step in the right direction. So thank you very much for sharing, Dr. Rafiq. Dr. Mustafa, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting discussion. Let me thank first again, Dr. Lisa. You brought a lot of things that really, if I may use the term of Prof. Aslam, are transforming the way we look at things. One of the things which I picked up interestingly is how to look at the needs of the maslaha first, before also reminds us of one of those utilitarian.
Dr. Mustafa, the bandwidth cannot handle your ideas. I think.
Maybe we can do away with seeing you. Maybe you switch off the video and we can hear you. Maybe I don't know if that will work.
Can you hear me, Dr. Okay. Can you hear?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So I was just saying that the idea of looking at maslaha first before you design a product is something very interesting. So it reminds us of those early utilitarian economists like J.S. Mill, who says you look at the society first before you look at yourself, which is actually in line of those maslaha thinking. Now, maybe the way forward, I would think, is that since there is already a kind of a review to see what has been taken as a stock, and when we look in the context of the book, there are around 6 areas that they have identified that could interestingly look at or are related to Maqasid al-Sharia. For example, the IBF products, the SPG, circular economy, impact investment, the ethics, and of course, the value-based intermediation, the VBI. And I thought the way forward maybe would be, in addition to that, we could add other elements to review and see what so far has been done, and we try to contextualize it to see what is the gap for the way forward. So I thought those are very interesting idea, and thank you very much, Dr. Lisa. Was I clear, Dr. Was it clear?
Yes, yes, it was quite clear. And on that note, I think this leads us to our final round very nicely. And I think brevity has to be the theme for this round because we have to finish. And that leads us to the way forward. And I think we'll jump right in. I will ask Prof. Asam to maybe give some comments on the framework on how we should move forward.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Riyasat. I think listening to the to the discussion so far, let me just propose something for all of us here. Sometimes we ourselves put artificial constraints on how we look at things. For example, when you look at the way how social finance is defined in the discourse out there, it basically says that any economic or finance or investment decision made in which you not only make individual gain, but you also have a social impact, or you contribute to others. So that's the definition of social finance. Unfortunately, in the book, some of the papers, I think they focus only on zakat, wakaf, microfinance. When actually, I think Islamic banking and finance should actually look at the idea of social finance as defined earlier. In other words, it doesn't have to be only limited to zakat, wakaf, and microfinance, but it should extend to all areas that you want to do. This idea of thinking of other stakeholders rather than just your shareholders, that's what it boils down to. Now, if that can be done, and if it can be agreed by all players in the market, I can understand if Maybank Islamic does it, but others don't do it, then you have a problem, right? So this is where probably regulators, I think, need to come in and make this as something that all financial institutions should be gearing towards. So everybody is now not only thinking of their shareholders, but also thinking of stakeholders. I don't know how that will work, but it's an idea that I think would be something that is worth considering. And for that, I don't know who's having that diagram. Is it?
Can we have that on the slides?
Is there a diagram? Yeah, this is something that we came up with. It's actually coming from a research project that a few of us did in the center some years ago. Initially, we wanted to talk about poverty alleviation. So the goal that we wanted to achieve, D, was poverty alleviation. And we were looking at sources of funds coming from Waqaf. All right. And the implementing agency was microfinance institutions. So basically, Waqaf, microfinance to alleviate poverty. But we looked at the project, the book, and maybe the way forward, and we kind of improved on it. And Dr. Riyasat, I think, helped to come up with this diagram. Although there is a little bit missing, I thought we agreed to add something on the bottom right. So basically, we are talking about integrated financial model in which your sources of funds are all these: zakat, wakaf, government, NGOs, international aid, public crowdfunding, which I think is being done already now in banks, right? So those are your sources of funds. Implementing agencies can also be, besides banks, all those institutions. I think in the case of Malaysia, the government plays a very big role in many, many activities. In other countries, in our research, we found that it wouldn't be the government, it had to be NGOs. In other countries, we found that it has to be international agencies playing the role, implementing agencies. And what do they do? Everyone agreed that there has to be a human resource. So this idea of giving the kits, and I'm not sure whether you also give some training as well. So it's being done. So you need to have this knowledge, skills, orientation, attitudes. Attitudes, very, very, very important, I think. And then this takaful thing. Initially when we started, we knew takaful was there. And then we found out, no, it's actually just to make the payment. If the person passes away or gets, then the takaful covers the payment. But we are talking about takaful for the recipients. and the family, because in many cases, what happens when they get sick, right? So this takaful also includes takaful for the family. And then genuine risk sharing instruments. So the last loop is supposed to say genuine risk sharing mechanisms to establish socioeconomic justice and well-being of all through the value-based intermediation. And what is it that we are trying to to focus on? Well, all the SDGs basically, or maybe a selected SDG. And the loop is finalized to show that it can actually generate income. So I think moving forward, just to take up what Rafiq was saying, if we are able to market and sell the products that are thinking about the environment, community, etc., and people value that, so they would be willing to pay for that. And so that generates income and then it goes back again. So I think, this I think is maybe what we looked at as the way forward. And I think for the bank itself, maybe Dr. Mustafa has something to say. So with that, I'll just stop here.
Thank you very much, Prof. Hassan, for keeping it short and sweet. Dr. Mustafa, if you can add on, because I think your part, it would be nice if you can add on to the application aspect of this.
Okay, are you sharing this?
Yeah,
okay.
We can see it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just to give you a very short background of this model, which is called IDEX, is the Human Development Index based on Maqasid Sharia. And this project was led by Prof. Rosita, Muhammad Amin from IIUM, and the team members were Prof. Salama, Prof. Aslam, myself, and Ozief. Now, the interesting thing about this model was that it focused on human development at almost 5 levels. That is the individual level, the family level, the societal level, the state level, and of course the global dimension at both humans, real individuals, and the institutions. And the parameters were defined, and it was presented at IDB, Islamic Development Bank in Jeddah. And there were also colleagues following from UK at that point in time of the presentation. Now, all the parameters were defined, just only remaining collecting the data. Now, the interesting thing about this model was the definition of maqasid itself was not about preservation or protection. So the word development was used in almost all the parameters of maqasid to show the dynamism. So you're talking about the development of moral values. Here you're talking about the things which the book has been discussing, the idea of fairness, the idea of justice, the idea of spiritual development. All those models are covered here. Then the self-development at both individual and institutional level, talking about the basic needs, etc. Now, the other dimension is that this model is almost like universal in nature. That means the dimensions could be extended to any institutions, whether they are banks or non-banks. So in our proposal for the way forward, and I thought that this model is really good to be extended first to our immediate partner. We call them strategic partner. That's the Maybank Islamic. To see what the Maybank has been doing in all its SDG initiatives. And I'm sure there's quite a lot, because there has been presentation from Maybank, and they have shown that a lot of efforts and resources have really gone from Maybank to actualize these SDGs in different dimensions. So one way forward, we thought, was to start with this strategic partner, Maybank, to see what has been done so far and what could be the way forward to chart those dimensions in terms of all the goals of SDG. For example, in terms of the moral dimension, which is reflected in SDG, let's say 1, how much has been done, or SDG 2, 1, 2, 3, and 4 for self-development, that is poverty, hunger, etc. SDG 3. So all the SDGs will be lined out here in those dimensions, and then the elements of those measurement, and then the indicators from Maybank Islamic. We could see indicators from them to measure their performances on this SDG based on Maqasid al-Sharia. By this way, they will be able to match those indicators and performance against what they have done and what is remaining to be done, and to what extent and what resources they require to do those things to move forward. And this will also be like an example, litmus paper for others to follow suit. So we thought our partner here could be the first to have a privilege of this new exercise. And this, inshallah, will require a lot of discussion from the IIM team with Maybank Islamic for the way forward. Wa jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Salam. Thank you very much, Dr. Mustafa, for showing the way this may be applied with our partners. Now maybe Dr. Lisa, if you can maybe weigh in.
Thank you very much. I think those are two nice diagrams, and we had a separate discussion yesterday on it, and I think it's really quite meaningful for us to think about. It draws a lot from the teachings of the book, and what is quite an interesting idea is to start thinking about UNSDG and Maqasid together. And what the book also proposes, and I think is something we could consider, is instead of reporting just on where we are on the development or achieving those goals, is also to think about where are we in terms of Maqasid. How far are we when we try to achieve the social impact from the goals that is asked upon from the Maqasid. I think I'll just end with one final thought, and it goes back to Prof. Aslam right from the beginning, in that this is a space where we need to be at the forefront of thought leadership. What the book keeps on saying as well, and what we know in practice and what we've seen, our contributions matter. The Sharia is all encompassing, and that significant work, I think, needs to be done so that all of us collaborate and ensure that the message is consistent and heard in the global space. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lisa. I think that's a very fascinating idea, as in banks reporting their Maqasid, footprint, just like we might with SDG. So I think that's a great thought, very innovative. I think what we'll do is we'll close this round here, because I think we have a general idea of how we are envisioning the future. We'd now like to open for a few minutes, right? Questions to the floor. Okay, if anybody has anything about any of the rounds, any questions that you want to ask. I have enabled my 360 vision, so. Was it so good that nobody has questions, or? Okay, all right, go ahead.
My name is Mohamed Abdul from School of Economics and Management Science. My question is with regard to the second to the last round, where Dr. Lisa mentioned some of the products that they have that support climate change, and of course, in terms of poverty reduction. But there are other indications of social developments like health and access to education. And I think Maybank as a group has a very large market in terms of healthcare. If you can venture, or if you are not venturing, or if you are not thinking of venturing into maybe health insurance in terms of Islamic perspective, because I have an experience with a friend. He works with an insurance company that offer health insurance. But at the end of the day, he thought that where he works is not in line with the teaching of Islam. That is the source of the funds. And he decided to resign. So I thought this is a very big market for a group like Maybank to venture in to bring out some innovative products that Muslim Ummah and people can be able to work in as employees. Thank you.
If I can take that question, it's a good question because currently I'm also responsible for the Islamic Bank, the group Islamic Banking franchise, of which we have banking, we have takaful, as well as we have asset management. So in the space of takaful, we have the family takaful as well as the general takaful side. On the family takaful side, we develop products like, for example, you mentioned for healthcare. And then the other one is for your beneficiaries. We call it smart waris, takaful, right? What happens is that if anything happens to you, who's going to actually take care of your debts? And then subsequently, it's because of probate. How will your dependents in your family actually survive beyond a certain time frame after your passing, right? So we developed that product.
Somebody commented.
Yeah.
Somebody.
Okay. So there are products currently within the different entities or maybe takes a look at that. Our ambition, to your question, our ambition is how do we actually export some of these products? How do we actually share some of these experiences that we have, right? Even that technology, I think we find that technology may enable us to actually go beyond borders, right? To be able to actually offer either Islamic banking products, takaful product, or investment products beyond currently, say, within a domestic time frame, right? So we have been active, but it is, I would say, still a journey. But we do receive, say, for example, guests and visitors about whether it can actually be implemented within their institutions or within the countries within which they operate. So there are those products actually. Yeah, there are those products. It's just that when it comes to progress, if banking is at, say, 30%, takaful industry is probably half that, 15% of the whole insurance and takaful business.
If I may add on to the point that raised by Dr. Rafiq, on the bigger, broader view, the aim and aspiration is for us to encompass 5 pillars of Islamic wealth management. So the motto of Islamic wealth management of the 5 pillars, from wealth creation to wealth accumulation, to wealth purification, distribution, and so on, right, is basically for us to have from cradle to Jannah solution. So against our key Islamic finance institution, I think we're proud to say that we are quite advanced in the Malaysia context. And what we're trying to do is to replicate the model that we have, a success story here, to a country where we coexist. Example, largest Muslim population of Indonesia, as well as Singapore, that we do have also presence. I hope you answer your question. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions?
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Is it okay for me to ask
sure.
first? Okay, my name is Omar. I'm doing my PhD in economics currently, pursuing in also Islamic economics. So I'm not speaking on behalf of scholars. I think we have lots of scholars and my lecturers over here that are watching me now. So I would like to speak on behalf of consumer. So I think in my generation, perhaps our literacy on consumer right and also consumer awareness is perhaps higher. And it's a good thing because in any civilization, in order to move forward, is we produce the next generation that's more aware and also perhaps no more than the past generation, right? That's how civilization works. And so it should be that my next generation after me is also more aware than me. So it's supposed to be like that. And speak on behalf as a consumer for Maybank for almost maybe 20 years. So I'm kind of on one point, I feel proud that Maybank becomes one of the biggest Islamic bank in the world. And in terms of apps, you are number one. I always use Maybank apps first rather than other banks. So kind of it's a good comments to you guys. But I would rather say I'm more proud if Maybank Islamic especially, or any Islamic banks outside, able to also champion other things rather than profits. So because the reason why I commit to Islamic banks mean we as consumer, we also can commit to other things, not only Islamic banks, right? There are lots of other competitors outside. And But the reason why we choose Islamic, not only banks, but Islamic products, Islamic education, a university, and Islamic other things, due to we believe that it contributes more. And having, I think having more social networks right now, we intermingle with the non-Muslim also a lot. And they kind of curious actually, why the Muslim always want Islamic this and that, Islamic entertainment. We have issues Islamic entertainment, movies, films. We also have issues in halal product, Islamic products. Why we always want this, encourage this, and now we have Madani as a using Islamic term, right? What's so special about this? Eventually, I think we need to stand out that to show that Islamic, the reason why it is we choose Islamic things, products, banks, and other services is due to because it's comprehensive and it shows that we are the leaders in doing good things. So, and perhaps asking some consumers, all of us also, we perhaps can collect with the consumer protection, not protection, but more like, because this consumer protection, they have stronger network with the legislators or regulators. So we can perhaps collect, or any consumer rights have collaboration with Islamic banks in order to change the regulations. So it's easier to be passed in the parliament or whatsoever. So that's only my opinion. Thank you.
Right. Would you like to respond, or I think it's more of a comment, but yeah, anybody.
Thank you very much for that. It's really refreshing. It's very nice. It's always very nice to hear from the consumer perspective. Indeed, we are very grateful to the points that was raised, and also your service and sentiment. It's something that we always continue to improve, and it's not easy with the threats of cybersecurity and all that. So we're always on our toes and ensuring that the system is very well and secure. A lot of things goes on at the back process. I think what I'll comment to that is to sum it all up from what we're saying is what we stand for is beyond profits, and we care for all living things. And this is irrespective of where we are, where we work. It's just not the banks, it's also what we do. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much, Dr. Liza.
Yes.
We have maybe time for one more.
Yes. Here, doctor. Sorry, my name is Akil. I'm a Sharia researcher at Maybank Islamic. I have a question to Prof. Mustafa, actually. You mentioned that Islamic finance still operates in conventional system. And also you quoted the word from Prof. Jamaluddin Atiyah in his book, Taf'il Maqasid Sharia. So it seems that the way we realize maqasid is through sustainability. So from there, can we say that we don't need some sort of Sharia sustainability framework or Islamic sustainability, because the sustainability itself is already comply with Sharia? So what your opinion, Prof. Mustafa? Thank you.
Can we get the diagram back on the screen? It's not needed. Okay.
I don't think it's needed.
Yeah, that was.
Okay, you have two dimensions of your question. First of all, thank you very much for this good question. The first question you ask is about Islamic finance operating on, I'm careful about my words. I said operating on conventional rules and regulation largely, because we are only around 6% of the global financial assets. So if you're 6%, you cannot shout. You have to follow the rules coming from Basel. You have to follow the rules coming from central bank. If you want to behave differently, then they will sanction you. So you have no Islamic bank. These are realities on the ground, whether you like it or not. You have to operate until such a time where your legs are strong to shout. But if you cannot shout, so you have to go by the rules of the games. Now the question is, do you stand by and say, okay, my hands are tied, I should not do anything? No, at least there must be something running on the ground which should be appreciated, that the efforts people are doing to move forward.
Dr. Mustafa, if you can hear me, perhaps you can disable your
Now,
video.
this is that we voice out our concern today. Is not that. Can you hear me?
Now we can, yeah.
Okay. Okay, let me remove the video. Okay. Islam is a public good, so everybody can comment about Islam. So the first thing I said is not operating in conventional system, but I'm using the word carefully, conventional rules and regulation. So underline this word. So the other second thing you talk about sustainability. We don't match Islam to sustainability. No, we match the conventional sustainability to Islam, because before this sustainability, which came in 2015, there was already maqasid thousands of years ago. Before this sustainability that we see today, there was already Quran and Sunnah long time ago. So the only thing we are discussing in this forum is to argue that, like Prophet Aslam says, Sharia should not only be confined to rules and regulations or law. We need to look at other dimensions of sustainability that could accommodate the features and nature of Sharia. So the parameters that we are developing, which I showed in the model, is a parameter that is based on Sharia within that broad context, not within the narrow legal definition, but within the broad context that will accommodate all the other dimensions which we think would be useful to move the industry forward. So our discussion and our engagement with the industry is more of a synergy than of a conflict. So it's a synergy that everybody will do his role, the industry are doing their role, we will do our role, and everybody will contribute to ensure that we move our industry forward. So this is the context in which I discuss. Thank you.
Okay, all right. That brings us to the end of the Q&A session. I would like to thank the esteemed panel members, especially Dato' Rafiq, for joining the discussion. No, it definitely welcome, but that's why. So I'd like to hand the floor over to our Master of Ceremony, Dr. Zara.
Right, thank you so much. Right, thank you so much, Dr. Riyasat, for moderating the forum. We hope that everyone benefit from the forum and discussion. So we are moving towards the end of the event. I would like to invite Associate Professor Dr. Nur Ehsan to accompany Prof. Faris to present a token of appreciation to our panelists. Yes. Okay, let me first invite Dr. Liza Maidin to receive this souvenir. Next, I would like to invite Prof. Aslam to receive the appreciation. As for Dr. Mustafa, we need a flight ticket to do that. So as for now, we can only send over our dua. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your presence here, sharing your thoughts and input with us. Last but not least, let us invite our moderator, Dr. Riyasat, to receive the appreciation for his wonderful job moderating the forum. All right, thank you, Prof. Haris. I would like to request Prof. Haris to remain for the exchange of mementos. I would like to invite Dato' Muhammad Rafiq, American, accompanied by Mr. Noor Zulkarnain, for the exchange of mementos as a gesture of appreciation for this collaborative project. All right, so we hope that the relationship between these two institutions will continue in the furtherment of the sustainable Islamic finance development. Our sincere gratitude lies with the Maybank Islamic Berhad for engaging with the Center for Islamic Economics, IIUM, for this project. We hope that this project will be beneficial for all the stakeholders in the Islamic economic and finance sector. To commemorate the event, let us have a photography session. I would like to invite our guests to be at the center of the hall for the photography session. Yeah. The participants can also move towards the center of the hall to be in the photo. Boleh guide? Boleh guide? The participants can move towards the center of the hall, be at the back of the guests. It's okay, it's okay. All right. That marks the end of our program today. Thank you everyone for joining us. On behalf of the organizer, I would like to apologize for any shortcoming in organizing the event. Just an additional announcement that the organizer has prepared some refreshment for everyone. So I would like to invite our guests and participants to enjoy our high tea at the banquet hall next door.